I've been working on one of these. In part 1, we figured out all of the art and creative stuff. In part 2, we did the design and more technical stuff. And this time, we're finally going to get down. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. At the end of the last part, I showed a knife all masked up and ready to go. But putting that mask on is like half of the process here. So we gotta go back in time a bit and cover that part. And then we'll get to what everyone came here for. I'm gonna get rid of this so that I can add some sick graphics in post. But there's two main things that need to happen here. We need to prep the knives, and we need to prep the masks. Once those two things are ready to go, we can stick them together. Now these knives obviously are factory made and they come in brand new condition. So I'm not worried about the surface finish or anything like that. The main thing I have to worry about is grease and other oils that are stuck onto the blade. Now none of these came with visible fingerprints on them, but I don't want to find out that there was some residue on this blade as the mask is coming off in the acid and I've basically destroyed the knife. I'd rather just clean the blade right at the beginning and not have to worry about it. Now I don't have to do anything crazy here, I'm just using dish soap and water. I am paying a bit more attention to the surface that I will be etching. In fact, I don't really clean any of the rest of the blade. The knife is going to get dirty during the process. As long as that one etching surface is pristine, I don't really care about the rest of the knife at that point. And of course, I work in batches of 10, so I'm just going to batch this out and clean all of them in one go. Once I dry them off, I just stick them back in their boxes, and that way I know that they're good to go while I'm prepping the masks. And that's pretty much it for preparing the blades. If these were used, I'd probably want to hand sand them down a bit, just kind of refresh the surface before I try to stick anything to it. But yeah, this is definitely the easy part. I've still got a bit to do on the computer, but before that I want to deal with my vinyl. I'm out of prepared stuff, so I've got to process a new roll. And yeah, this is some pretty straightforward stuff. I'm just cutting 4-inch strips off of the roll. And it's really tempting to just cut what I need for the project, but I know I'm going to hate myself later if I need to pull out the paper cutter and pull out the roll of vinyl and just do this again and again and again. So I'm just going to process the whole roll. And I made this janky vinyl roll holder out of moving boxes, but it gets the job done. Anyways, the vinyl is prepped and ready to go. We'll just hop back onto the computer for a second and move on with our lives. The last thing I have to do before I cut these masks out is to add the maker mark and the number for each blade. So for my projects, I do 10 of a kind, and I number them from 0 to 9. And for anyone who's trying to make sense out of this footage, I have all 10 maker marks grouped together on every one of these duplicates. And what I'm doing is I'm picking through them all, searching for it. And when I find it, I have it selected. So if I undo, it moves it back into the original position, but it stays selected. At that point, I'll cut it out, grab all of the rest of them, delete them, and then paste it back in place. And then that way it's the only number of its kind. And then I can do the punching operation or the subtraction operation and embed it into the final cut paths. I hope that made sense. I basically have to find the correct number, cut it out while it's in the correct position, and then paste it in place once everything else is deleted. And while I'm here, I'm also going to space them out so that there's 4 inches between each of them and they're evenly spaced, 3 at a time. You'll see why I need to do that when I get into the other program to cut these out. While I was editing this video, there was some drama with Cricut and how they were trying to restrict their customers, and I ranted about it here for a little while. But apparently they've completely backpedaled on those changes, so I pulled down the video and I'm gonna re-upload it with this audio instead. This is Cricut Design Space. It's the software that I have to use to send my work to my Cricut maker. I have to upload it to their cloud service, which is still kind of annoying, but whatever. And because I took the time to space these designs out in my other program, while I'm here, I don't really need to change anything. I just make sure that the actual size matches up. When it's first imported, it comes in a little bit small for some reason, but I just dial in the correct measurements in the length and width boxes, and everything works out. I have the masks in groups of 3, and that's because I can only fit 3 masks on my cutting mat at the same time. So yeah, this is just something else that I have to batch out, get it done in 4 goes. And I don't really need to babysit the machine while it's working, so it's kind of nice. Before I start cutting though, I like to inspect the actual cutting tool that I have. Just make sure that there isn't any like dirt or debris stuck to it. And I don't really want to be using dull bits for this either. After the masks come off of the machine, I do go in and inspect them. Sometimes little parts are like popping up and I just have to like push them back down, make sure that everything is where it should be. But yeah, cutting the masks itself is pretty straightforward once I've done all of the prep work from part 2. With the masks cut, I just need to inspect them and then add transfer tape onto them. And what the transfer tape does is hold all of the individual pieces together while I transfer this design onto its final surface. And once it's on there, it'll peel away from the design. And you don't need to have fancy tools to do this. You can see I've got an old Presto card from when I lived in Toronto, and that works pretty well. I've seen footage of people doing this without like taking this extra time to press the transfer tape into the design, and it's worked for them, but it hasn't for me. And I think that's probably just because my designs and the stuff that I do is a lot more intricate than most of the stuff that I've seen being made with vinyl cutters on the internet. At least that's my best guess. And here's another thing you have to deal with when you cut out small, intricate shapes. Sometimes you lose them. They get caught on the cutting tool in the machine and get whisked away somewhere else, or they stick to the blade and they mess up future cuts that it tries to make. That's always fun. Anyways, on close inspection, I found the missing piece floating around by the skull, and I had to gently pick it up and nudge it into place. The rest of the work was pretty uneventful. I just powered through it and got all of the transfer tape done. I tried my best to get this on camera, but if you look really closely, you can see the skull and the flower, even a bit of the bullet trail. And as I go over and rub the transfer tape in, all of those seams and details disappear, and it just looks like an uncut piece of vinyl, at least on camera. And that's it for the prep work. The knives and the masks are ready to go. Getting the initial alignment is basically the whole trick when it comes to applying these masks properly. So to get that alignment, I just stand in front of my window and let the light shine through so I can see the design and the silhouette of the knife. And from there, I just kind of try to finagle it into place. This footage is just me checking the fit, but when I actually go to apply the mask itself, I peel back the top of the design close to the tip of the knife, and I'll stick that section once I'm confident with the alignment. And if I do that properly, it sets the orientation of the mask permanently, at which point I can move back to my desk and do the rest of the application process. And this is also why I use white vinyl most of the time. It makes lining it up accurately a lot easier when a lot of light can come through the vinyl itself. And you can see here, even with the transfer tape, this one is trying to fight me the entire way. All of the smaller details are catching and not sticking to the transfer tape properly, and generally just being a pain in the butt. And to be honest, you win some and you lose some. Like some of these I'll like go to apply them and they'll peel back flawlessly. I've got no problems with them. But then there are other ones that just want to fight the entire way. But then there's also specific details that I'll find if they're troublesome on one mask. Like that specific detail will be troublesome on all of the masks. And then I have to like work around it and, Just make it work. And if I get it on successfully and it's still in the right place, I'll get another sheet of vinyl and stick it onto the back, creating this kind of pocket for the knife to sit in. And as long as I seal this up properly, it'll be waterproof, so acid is only going to go where I want it to. And that's what we're looking for. So I've got to do this 9 more times, but of course I screwed up 3 of them in the process. So I'm going to have to deal with those before I move forward. The easiest way that I've found to strip the vinyl is using my craft knife and just getting between the vinyl and the metal and just sliding across and doing the best that I can. I've got this wonderful vinyl glue to deal with, but it comes off fairly simply with some acetone, so it's not a huge deal. Regardless, applying these masks is definitely the most nerve-wracking part of the process, and it's also kind of tedious and annoying. I look forward to the day that I can get through 10 of them at a time without having to redo any of them. And finally, they're all done. Except they're not done because I still need to weed them. Lucky for me, weeding is fun and relaxing, even though it's pretty time consuming. As long as I've got something good to listen to, it's definitely one of the more enjoyable parts of the process. It's just so satisfying to peel back the vinyl and let the image emerge as I go. And I've been imagining this in my head for so long that this is the first real glimpse I have of it, and I get so excited seeing them at this stage. And once I've done this 10 times, I am finally ready to do the dang thing. I sometimes wonder if people think that the process kind of starts at the etch, because as you can see here, it's really like the finish line. Creating the artwork is a beast unto itself, and then applying the masks and getting to this stage is like its own process as well. And honestly, this video is getting kind of long. I could probably even do another separate part just for the etch. But ain't nobody got time for that, man. I'm just gonna wrap this up. So here's our first blade going for a dip. I filmed this vertically because of TikTok, but it is what it is. And you can see that the acid is clear at this point. It'll develop color as it goes, but as this first knife goes in, it's only gently tinting it a greenish, or I guess a yellowish hue. On TikTok, they were calling it chartreuse, which is pretty accurate. And here I've skipped ahead to blade number 8. You can see that the acid is a lot darker now. It's a really deep green. The bucket's filled with a saturated solution of baking soda and water, and that's to neutralize the acid that I'm working with. And I'll just let it hang out in there while I dip my last blade. Once the acid's been neutralized, we finally get our first glimpse of the work. There isn't much to see yet, but I'm going to head over to my workbench and start taking the vinyl off. And I always tear up and away from the design, and my goal is to keep as much of the back vinyl plate on the knife as I can, and that'll just protect it while I'm doing all this more rough cleanup work. Once all of the outer stuff is peeled away, I go in with my craft knife and start tackling the main design. This is a lot easier to do while the knife is still wet, actually, so I take advantage of that. I think it just lets the knife push liquid in between the blade and the vinyl, and it definitely just helps to peel that stuff up a lot easier. So I'll get all of that stuff off first, and then I'll go in and wipe down the blade and get everything off of it. After I've wiped off all of the baking soda and water, I'll hit it again with some acetone, and this is really going to start pulling up any gunk that's left on the blade, any chemical-y stuff, any oxides that are just loosely adhered. Yeah, this will get all that stuff off. And now you can see the blade in all of its horrible glory. The surface finish, the scratches, it needs some work. So let's start to clean it up. I have a Dremel, and I have these tiny little wire wheels. I'm not really sure if this counts as a wire wheel or a Scotch-Brite wheel. I don't know, someone in the comments can let me know. But it's a good abrasive pad that I use with a relatively low speed. in my Dremel, and it's really good at getting into all of these crevices and cleaning up and crisping up all of these details. And even just doing this, like, really brings out the etch pattern. Like, the knife still needs a lot of, like, hand finishing work, but the pattern itself pops so much more after this initial cleaning up process. And I think I'll take this opportunity to address why I finished the blades the way that I do. Because people often ask me if I could darken the etched portions, and they think that that would look cool. And I know what they mean. I've definitely seen etched blades that are darkened. It's very common with carbon steel blades especially, because I think it's just more straightforward to do it. But to be honest, it's a bit of an art style choice. I love the contrast between the more matte etched surface and the higher polish that I can achieve when I'm doing my hand sanding. And that contrast alone just makes the piece feel a lot more interesting to me than to have stark contrast, and you don't really need to explore the knife to see all of the details. It's kind of like, if you see the blade, I want you to be like holding it in your hand to really be able to appreciate it. And if you like holding it in your hand, you're more likely to cook with it. And that's kind of the main goal here. I want people to be encouraged to cook with these. I definitely understand that the general consensus is that they're really pretty and people would be kind of intimidated to cook with them. But I don't want my finishing process to add to that anxiety. Like, if there's a dark oxide layer that's darkening parts of the blade, then just by using it and washing the knife, you would be wearing that surface away and quote unquote ruining the surface finish. And I don't want people to feel like that. I just want people to use the knife, enjoy it, and look at it, and not have to worry about if them just cooking with it is going to be, like, negatively affecting it. And that even comes through with my more polished, quote-unquote, finish on the unetched portions of the blade. I just go for, like, a satin finish. Like, you can kind of see a reflection, but if you're looking at the blade, you still see the scratch pattern, and it's just a bit more soft. It's a bit more utilitarian. If I take time to polish these up to like a mirror shine on the top surface, then every time you cook or clean it, you nick that surface and feel that you've ruined the blade. I don't want people to have to deal with that. I just want them to, like, you know, cook and have a cool looking blade while they're doing it. Between what you saw with the Dremel and what you're seeing now, the knives were thoroughly cleaned with soap and water, and we're basically in the home stretch here. What I was doing with the Scotch-Brite pad was going through the etched surface and making sure that it was all even and uniform. There are little bits in the corners that kind of get missed with the wire wheel that I was using, and the lighting in my basement isn't the greatest, so when I'm up here I can really move around the knife and see where the surface finish needs to be improved. The thing that I really have to worry about here is overdoing it and polishing that surface, because of course if the surface is too polished, then I lose all the contrast between the etch and the unetched portions. And once I'm done with the Scotch-Brite, the surface is actually in pretty decent shape already, but I go through with a very fine emery cloth, and I'll keep hand sanding with that. And I've found that this is actually like really all that I need to get a decent surface finish. I mean, I'm working with factory finished blades to begin with. The abrasive wheel that I use is relatively gentle, to be honest. I don't really put a lot of pressure on it while I'm using it. So the scratches that I've introduced to the process are really quite superficial, and I just need to massage them all out. And I have another strip of emery cloth to clean up the bolster. Sometimes it gets a few stray nicks up there and I need to just polish those out. Doesn't take too long. And the last thing that I do is rub this abrasive grit into the surface. It's like a food safe polishing compound. And that just about wraps it up. It's been a bit of a journey. Of course I have to do this 10 times, but you know, that's the whole process. I hope you enjoyed coming along on the journey with me. I realize that I'm still pretty new to YouTube, and honestly, part 1 is kind of atrocious to watch on the second run through. But I'll be sharing my future projects here as well. And either way, I hope that this gave you a decent insight into the work that goes into these pieces of art. If you're interested, these knives are for sale on my website. I'll leave a link in the description. And other than that, I guess I'll see you for the next project. Have a good one.